The GP tent sat at the edge of the field like a tired animal trying to rest. Canvas walls flapped softly in the dry wind, and the smell inside was a mix of dust, antiseptic, and sweat. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when exhaustion settled deep into the bones. Medics moved from bed to bed with practiced speed, their faces calm but worn. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. Inside, quiet voices and short commands filled the air. Near the back of the tent, a man sat on a folding chair with his young son resting against his chest. The child's arm was wrapped in a temporary bandage, and his face looked pale but calm. The man kept one arm around the boy, and the other resting on his knee. He did not fidget. He did not complain. He simply watched the tent with steady eyes, as if taking in every detail without needing to comment. The man looked ordinary. His clothes were plain. His boots were scuffed and dusty, the kind worn by someone who had walked a lot. There were no visible patches, no shiny rank marks, nothing that stood out. His hair was neatly trimmed, but not in a way that drew attention. His face showed signs of long days and short nights, the kind of tired that never fully goes away. A few beds away, a Marine medic leaned against a supply crate, stretching his shoulders. He had been on his feet since before sunrise. His humor was still there, but it was thin, held together by habit more than energy. He scanned the tent, looking for anything, to lighten the mood. That was when he noticed the man and the boy. The Marine watched them for a moment. The child clutched the man's shirt lightly, as if afraid to let go. The man leaned his head down now and then, whispering something that made the boy nod. There was comfort there. Quiet, steady comfort, trying to sound casual. The Marine walked over with a small grin. "Hey," he said, friendly and relaxed. "Been a long day, huh?" The man looked up and returned the nod. "Yes," he replied. His voice was calm, not tired, not sharp. Just calm. The Marine glanced at the boy. "How's he holding up?" "He's strong," the man said. "Braver than he thinks." The boy gave a small smile at that and leaned closer to his father. The Marine chuckled softly. He leaned against a nearby pole and looked the man over again, this time with curiosity. Something about the man's posture felt different. Not stiff, not casual either. Just steady, trying to keep things light. The Marine tilted his head and said, "So? What's your rank?" It came out as a joke. The kind of question asked 100 times in places like this. Usually it led to a laugh, maybe a playful answer. Sometimes people exaggerated. Sometimes they shrugged and said they were nobody important. A couple of nearby medics overheard and smirked. One of them shook his head with a grin, expecting the usual response. The man didn't answer right away. He looked down at his son first, adjusted the way the boy was sitting so he'd be more comfortable. He brushed a bit of dust from the child's sleeve with his thumb. Only after that did he look back at the Marine. The pause was short, but noticeable. The Marine's smile stayed in place, though it started to feel a little awkward. He laughed lightly. "Just curious," he added. No pressure. The man nodded once, slow and thoughtful. Before he could speak, the sound of a stretcher being rolled past cut through the space. Medics moved quickly, focused, serious. The moment stretched. Then the man spoke. "I'm active duty," he said simply. The Marine raised his eyebrows. "Yeah, same here." The man nodded again. The Marine waited for more. When none came, he laughed. "All right, you're making me work for it." "Specialist?" "Sergeant." The man's eyes stayed steady. There was no hint of pride in them. No tension either. He glanced down at his son again, as if checking that the boy wasn't listening too closely. Then he answered. He said his rank quietly. Not loud enough to draw attention. Not soft enough to be unclear. The Marine blinked. He let out a short laugh, thinking he misheard. "Sorry, what was that?" The man repeated it. Same tone. Same calm voice. The Marine's grin faded. He straightened without realizing it. His mind raced, trying to place the rank, trying to make it fit with the man sitting in front of him in dusty clothes and worn boots. That's pretty high," the Marine said slowly. "Yes," the man replied. "It is." A medic nearby stopped organizing supplies. Another looked over, confused by the sudden change in the Marine's tone. The Marine cleared his throat. "I didn't expect that." The man gave a small, understanding nod. "Most people don't." There was no edge in his voice. No challenge. Just a statement of fact that the Marine felt heat rise in his face. He glanced around, suddenly aware of how many people were nearby. He lowered his voice. "Sir, I wasn't trying to." The man raised a hand gently, stopping him. "It's fine," he said. "You didn't mean any harm." The Marine swallowed. "Still, I should have been more respectful." The man looked at him for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "Respect isn't about knowing someone's rank before you speak," he said. "It's about how you treat them after." That hit harder than any sharp correction could have. The Marine nodded, feeling smaller than he had a moment ago. "Yes, sir." The man didn't correct him. He didn't insist on formalities. He simply returned his attention to his son. The boy shifted a little. "Dad?" He whispered. "I'm here," the man said immediately, his voice softening. "You okay?" The boy nodded. "Can we go home soon?" The man smiled, just a little. "Soon. As soon as they say you're good." The Marine watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest. This wasn't the image he had in his head when he thought of someone with that rank. There was no distance here. No command voice. Just a father doing his best to keep his child calm in an unfamiliar place. Senior medical officer walked by and glanced at the man. He froze mid-step. His posture changed instantly. He snapped to attention without a word. The Marine felt his stomach drop. "Sir," the officer said, voice firm and respectful. The man looked up, surprised. "At ease," he said quickly. "Please." The officer hesitated, then relaxed. "I didn't realize you were here." "I'm just a parent today," the man replied. "My son comes first." The officer nodded, clearly unsure what to say next. "Of course, sir." He moved on, casting one last respectful glance before disappearing into the crowd of medics that the tent felt different. Now quieter, more focused. Word traveled fast in places like this. Even without anyone saying it out loud, the Marine stood there, hands at his sides, feeling the weight of his earlier joke settle in. He had meant nothing by it. But now he understood how easily assumptions were made, how quickly people judged based on appearances. "I'm sorry," he said again, more quietly this time. The man met his eyes. "I know," he said, "and I appreciate it." The Marine nodded. "Your kid's lucky," he added. "You seem like a good dad." The man looked down at his son, then back up. "I try," he said. "That's all any of us can do." A medic called out that the boy would be seen next. The man stood carefully, lifting his son into his arms with ease. The boy wrapped his arms around his father's neck, trusting, calm as they moved toward the treatment area. The Marine stepped aside, giving them space. He watched them go, his earlier fatigue replaced by a quiet sense of reflection. What stayed with him wasn't the rank. It was the way the man had answered without pride, without anger, and without needing to prove anything at all. And as the canvas walls continued to flap, and Fay tent felt different now, quieter, as if everyone inside had sensed the change without needing words. The man carried his son carefully, walking toward a small row of makeshift beds set up for minor injuries. He moved with purpose, but there was no hurry, no show of authority. Every step was careful, deliberate, as if he were balancing the weight of responsibility and compassion at the same time. The boy shifted slightly in his father's arms, tired but curious, peeking over the man's shoulder at the surrounding medics. He whispered something softly, too low for anyone but his father to hear. The man leaned down just enough to respond, his voice gentle, steady, a quiet comfort that wrapped around the child like a shield. The Marine who had asked the joking question earlier stood near a supply crate, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He watched silently as the man moved. He still couldn't shake the shock from the first exchange. Something about the calm way the man carried himself, the quiet confidence, didn't match the rank he had revealed. He looked ordinary. But now, seeing him interact with his son, the Marine began to understand that rank was only part of the story. Actions spoke louder than titles. The man laid his son down carefully on one of the beds, supporting the child's small frame as the medics began their examination. His eyes never left the boy, watching for any signs of discomfort or fear. When the nurse adjusted the bandage slightly, he nodded in appreciation, but his voice remained soft and polite. The Marine approached, curiosity mixed with respect. "Sir," he began, hesitating, "can I ask why you're here like this? I mean, just as a dad, not, your rank." The man looked up, meeting the Marine's eyes with calm honesty. "I come as a father first," he said simply. "My son is what matters most right now. Everything else can." "Wait," the Marine blinked, taken aback by the simplicity and truth in the answer. He had expected a formal explanation or some guarded response, but instead he found humility. It wasn't weakness. It was strength. Real strength. Nearby, another medic glanced at the two of them, sensing the quiet tension that had shifted in the tent. The officer who had passed earlier gave a nod of acknowledgement, but even he didn't intervene. Everyone seemed to understand, in some unspoken way, that this man's presence was different. Important, yet unassuming. The father spoke again, this time to his son. "We'll be done soon, okay?" His voice was soft, encouraging. The boy nodded, trusting completely. There was a bond between them that didn't need explanation. The Marine watched the interaction, realizing he had never seen leadership like this in action. Not in a briefing room, not in a classroom. This was leadership carried in quiet acts of care as the medics worked. The man asked questions in calm tones, making sure his son was comfortable and not scared. He didn't bark orders or assert his authority. He simply offered guidance and assurance. Every word, every motion, was deliberate and measured. It was clear to the Marine that this wasn't just about his rank or his role in the military. This was about responsibility, patience, and understanding qualities that didn't always appear on a uniform. A nurse looked up, noticing the Marine observing the scene. She whispered, "You know he's one of the top leaders around here, right?" The Marine nodded quietly, trying to process the thought. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. "I know." Now, the man finished speaking with his son, who finally allowed himself to relax a little. He held the child's hand, guiding him gently as the nurse finished adjusting the bandage. There was no rush, no impatience, only steady care. It was a lesson in itself. The Marine could feel the tension inside himself slowly shift, replaced with a sense of respect and understanding at that moment. A group of younger soldiers entered the tent, laughing and joking among themselves. They stopped mid-step when they noticed the man and his child. Their smiles faltered, replaced with quiet acknowledgement. One of them whispered something to a friend, and the Marine caught a few words like high rank and respected. It wasn't a secret, but the man's low-key presence had kept it. Understated until now, the man noticed the subtle shift in energy, but didn't react. He focused entirely on his son, speaking gently and making sure he understood everything. The Marine observed, realizing that humility wasn't the absence of strength. It was the awareness of it, paired with restraint. The man didn't need to command attention. He earned it silently through his care, his presence, and the steady example he set. After a few moments, the nurse finished checking the boy. "All done," she said, smiling. "He's good to go." The father lifted his son carefully, adjusting his hold so the child felt secure. "Thank you," he said sincerely, nodding to the nurse. She smiled, appreciating the genuine respect in his voice. The Marine stepped closer, still feeling a mixture of awe and curiosity. "Sir," he said softly, "can I ask? How do you manage it? Balancing everything, I mean. Your rank, your duties, and, well, being a dad?" The man looked at him, his calm eyes meeting the Marine's. He paused for a moment, thinking. "It's not always easy," he admitted. "There are days when it feels impossible. But you learn to prioritize. Your people, your family. You do what matters most first. Everything else comes after." The Marine nodded slowly, understanding a truth that went beyond the military. It was about life, responsibility, and choices. The man's words weren't just about rank. They were about values. About character. The child yawned quietly in his father's arms, leaning his head against his chest. The father adjusted his hold, murmuring softly, and the Marine watched. He realized that leadership, real leadership, often went unseen. It wasn't about standing in front of a crowd or giving orders. It was in quiet actions, in steady hands, and in patience when it was needed most. The tent felt heavier now, not in a bad way, but in the weight of understanding. Everyone around seemed to move a little slower, speak a little softer, as if acknowledging the presence of someone whose authority didn't need to be announced. A senior officer walked past again, this time pausing to observe. He gave a small, respectful nod to the man. The father returned it with a slight smile, still focused on his son. No ceremony, no show of pride, just quiet dignity. The Marine took a deep breath. He had thought he understood rank, authority, and respect. But standing there, watching this man interact with his child, he realized how much he had underestimated what real strength looked like. It wasn't about being the loudest or the most commanding. It was about calm care and the ability to act rightly when it mattered most. The boy stirred in his father's arms, looking up with trusting eyes. The man adjusted his hold, speaking softly to reassure him. "We'll head back soon," he said. "Just a little more patience." The Marine nodded to himself, a quiet lesson sinking in. This was more than a single moment. It was an example, one he would carry with him long after leaving the tent. Leadership wasn't just about orders or rank insignia. It was about presence, patience, and care, especially for those who depended on you most. As the man prepared to leave the bed area, he made sure his son's steps were steady, guiding him carefully toward the exit. The Marine followed at a distance, not out of duty, but out of curiosity and respect. He watched the pair move through the tent, observing the quiet impact one person could have just by being present. Kind and responsible. By the time they reached the doorway, the Marine realized he had been holding his breath. The energy in the tent shifted once more, not dramatically, but subtly, as everyone resumed their tasks with renewed focus. It was as if the presence of this father, this leader in plain clothes, had reminded them all of something important, something beyond ranks, beyond titles. The man paused for a moment at the edge of the tent, looking down at his son. "Ready?" he asked. The boy nodded, gripping his father's hand. The man smiled gently, guiding him into the light outside. The Marine remained behind, feeling a mix of awe, humility, and inspiration. He had intended to make a small joke to lighten the mood. Instead, he had witnessed something far more powerful: a father's care, a leader's restraint, and the quiet authority that came from genuine character. As the tent's canvas flapped gently in the breeze, the Marine understood that this moment would stay with him forever. It was a lesson he hadn't expected to learn that day, in the middle of the dust and exhaustion, among medics and soldiers, and with a small child quietly leaning on his father's chest. Leadership, respect, and true strength could be revealed in the softest, most ordinary moments, and sometimes that was enough to change how everyone around you saw the world. A long day dragged on. The Marine knew he wouldn't forget this moment anytime soon. The tent had settled into an unusual quiet after the man and his son had moved through it. The sound of soft footsteps, the clinking of medical tools, and the low hum of conversation continued, but everything felt different. The Marine who had asked the joke earlier still stood near the supply crates, his arms crossed, watching the man as he assisted his son outside the bed area. There was a sense in the air, subtle but undeniable, that everyone present had realized something extraordinary about the quiet, unassuming father. Suddenly the flap of the tent moved, and a group of soldiers entered. They were mid-discussion, laughing and exchanging stories from the field. When they noticed the man standing there with his child, talking quietly with the nurse, their expressions changed. The laughter faded. They paused mid-step, their voices lowering instinctively. Some straightened their posture. The Marine noticed the shift too, and he felt a tightening in his chest. Something unspoken had passed through the tent, and he realized it was about more than just rank. The man didn't seem to notice or care about the sudden change in energy. His attention remained on his son, adjusting the way the boy held his arm, making sure he wasn't in pain or uncomfortable. He spoke softly to the child, asking if anything hurt or felt odd. His calm and measured tone seemed to ripple through the tent, making the atmosphere heavier with respect. The Marine leaned closer to another medic, whispering, "Do they all know?" he asked. The medic shook his head slightly, eyes wide. "They do now," he said quietly. "And that's why everyone stopped." The Marine swallowed, realizing how easily he had underestimated appearances. The man had not shouted his authority. He had not demanded attention. Yet the moment he revealed his rank, or rather when his rank was recognized, the tent had gone still. It wasn't intimidation. It was respect. A quiet, commanding presence that no joke could touch. A senior officer, walking past the area, stopped completely. His attention was fixed on the man. He had clearly recognized him immediately. His posture shifted from casual to formal in an instant. The Marine saw the officer's eyes widen just slightly, a sign of recognition and acknowledgement. "Sir," the officer said, his voice firm but controlled. The man raised a hand, signaling the officer to relax. "At ease," he said softly. There was no pride, no arrogance, only a calm assurance that told everyone present, including the Marine, that he was in control, even in a situation that didn't require it. The officer gave a small nod, as if accepting the gesture, and D moved on. But the tent remained tense with awareness. Other soldiers who had been tending to patients stopped for a moment, observing the man with quiet curiosity and awe. The Marine could feel the shift in his own attitude, a growing respect that mixed with his initial embarrassment. The boy, sensing the tension in the room, clung a little tighter to his father. The man noticed immediately, kneeling slightly to bring himself to the child's level. "Hey," he said softly, brushing the boy's hair from his forehead. "Everything's okay. Just us here. No one else matters right now." The boy nodded, breathing a little easier. His grip loosened just enough for his father to hold him comfortably. The Marine observed, thinking about the strength it must take to command attention without words. to lead without raising a voice. Here, authority was not displayed through insignia or loud orders. It was shown through care, patience, and presence. Other soldiers in the tent had begun to move again, but more quietly, more deliberately. They seemed aware that they were in the presence of someone whose authority did not need constant reaffirmation. The Marine realized that the man's influence was subtle but profound. One small gesture, one calm word, and the environment had changed. The father adjusted his son's sleeve, checking the temporary bandage. "All done," he said encouragingly. "See? Nothing to worry about." The boy gave a small smile, trusting completely. The Marine could see the relief in his own chest as well. There was something about witnessing this, seeing leadership and care combined, that left him breathless. He had thought he understood what rank meant. Now he realized he had only understood half the story. The man's voice, still quiet, carried over to the group of soldiers nearby. "It's important to take care of the people around you," he said softly. "Always first we care, then we act." The Marine felt those words settle deep in him. They were simple, almost obvious, but coming from someone who had the weight of responsibility and still chose kindness first, they carried power. He could see the soldiers around him nodding subtly, absorbing the lesson without realizing it fully. A medic approached the man to check on his son once more, explaining a small detail about the bandage. The father listened carefully, nodding, asking one or two clear questions to ensure he understood the next steps. He responded politely, thanking the medic sincerely. There was no bossiness in his tone, no hint of demanding recognition. His authority was felt, not forced. The Marine's mind kept returning to the officer's reaction earlier. How quickly people had shifted from casual chatter to a respectful stillness. The man had revealed his rank in a single quiet sentence, yet the effect had been immediate. And yet, he had not demanded it. He had allowed respect to arise naturally, from the way he acted, not from the way he spoke. The boy, feeling reassured, began to wiggle a little, shifting to see more of the tent. The father adjusted him again, holding him steady, but allowing a small sense of independence. He spoke softly to encourage confidence and calm. It was a delicate balance, something the Marine admired deeply. Nearby, a soldier whispered to another, clearly trying to understand what had just happened. "Who is he?" he asked. "High-ranking," came the whispered reply. "But he doesn't act like it." That's the strange part. The Marine overheard and nodded slightly to himself. Strange, yes, but powerful in the truest sense. Leadership did not always shout. Sometimes it whispered, and that whisper could still stop a tent full of people in their tracks. The father prepared to move toward the exit, holding his son carefully. He glanced around the tent one last time, making eye contact with several medics. "Thank you all," he said, his voice calm and genuine, "for everything you do here." No one spoke. The words weren't needed. The respect was visible in the way people stood, the way their eyes followed him. Even the Marine felt it, a quiet but deep recognition that this was not an ordinary parent, and not an ordinary man. The boy shifted again, yawning softly. "Can we go now, Dad?" "Yes," the father said gently, lifting him into his arms with ease. "Let's go." As they moved through the tent, the Marine watched, feeling the weight of the moment. He had intended a small joke, a bit of light teasing. Instead, he had witnessed a lesson in authority, respect, and character that would stay with him forever. The quiet dignity, the calm care, the natural command, these were things no rank could truly measure. Yet they spoke louder than any insignia ever could. The canvas walls of the tent flapped gently in the wind as the man guided his son toward the outside. Soldiers returned to their duties, but the energy had shifted. The Marine noticed how quietly people spoke, how gently they moved, how awareness lingered in the air. Everyone had absorbed something intangible from this encounter. For the Marine, the lesson was personal. He had assumed too much based on appearances, had made a joke without considering who he was speaking to. But he had also witnessed the power of quiet strength, of patience, and of care. It was a moment that reshaped how he understood leadership and respect. As the man and his son stepped out of the tent into the bright light, the Marine felt a sense of awe and humility. He had learned that rank alone was meaningless without action. That respect was earned in the way you treated others, and that true leadership could exist in the smallest gestures. And as the flap of the tent settled back into its usual rhythm, the Marine knew that he would carry this lesson with him in every choice, every action, and every moment of responsibility he faced from that day forward. The quiet power of this single father had frozen the tent, and in doing so, had awakened a deeper understanding in everyone present. It was a lesson in humanity, in leadership, and in the strength that comes from caring first, commanding second, and always leading with integrity. The air in the GP tent remained heavy, with quiet respect long after the man and his son had moved through it. Soldiers and medics alike went about their tasks more carefully, more deliberately. Conversations had dropped to softer tones, movements slowed just slightly, and a new awareness lingered in the space. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. The Marine who had joked earlier found himself leaning against the wall, arms crossed, unable to shake the image of the father holding his child with such calm, quiet authority. The man's presence was unmistakable now, even without his rank on display. His words, his gestures, and the way he carried his son all spoke volumes. No one had seen him demand respect, yet everyone had given it. That was the thing that struck the Marine the most, leadership that earned loyalty without needing to assert itself. After checking one last detail with the nurse, the father prepared to leave the immediate area. His son was safe, bandaged properly, and reassured. He adjusted the boy's small jacket, brushing off some dust from the tent floor, then lifted him gently into his arms. The boy rested against his chest, tired but calm, and the father's eyes scanned the tent once more, taking in the faces of medics and soldiers. He nodded subtly, not to command attention, but to acknowledge the quiet respect he felt in return. The Marine stepped forward cautiously. "Sir," he said softly, almost hesitant, Can I ask you something?" The father looked down at him, calm and open. "Of course," he replied. "How do you manage it all? Your responsibilities, your rank, and raising your son alone?" The Marine's voice carried a mix of curiosity and genuine awe. He had seen leaders before, but never like this, never someone who could hold a child in one hand and authority in the other with such balance. The man smiled faintly, a warmth in his eyes. "It isn't easy," he said slowly, "and there are days when it feels like nothing is enough. But it comes down to priorities. You take care of the people who matter most first. Then everything else falls into place around them." The Marine nodded, absorbing the weight of that statement. It wasn't about orders, ranks, or medals. It was about choices, care, and integrity. It was about responsibility carried with humility, and he could see clearly now why the tent had frozen moments ago. The man's strength wasn't loud. It wasn't visible in outward displays. It existed quietly in the decisions he made, in the actions he took, and in the way he treated others. The father adjusted his son's hold on him, noticing the small fatigue in the boy's eyes. "You're doing well," he murmured, brushing back a strand of hair from the child's forehead. "Soon we'll head out, okay?" The boy nodded, relaxing slightly. His trust in his father was complete, unshakable, and the Marine could feel that trust extending outward, affecting everyone around them. There was a ripple effect in the room, a reminder that real leadership could be demonstrated in the most ordinary of moments. Nearby, A younger soldier whispered to his companion. "Do you see that? He doesn't even have to say much, and everyone's, I don't know, paying attention differently." His friend nodded. "Yeah, I've seen ranks, I've seen medals. But this feels different." The Marine listened, recognizing the truth in their words. There was a natural authority in the man's actions, a presence that demanded respect without enforcing it. The father didn't need to assert power. He didn't need to instruct or correct. His care for his child, his calm demeanor, and his attention to those around him were enough. The man began walking toward the tent's exit, his steps measured and steady. The boy rested comfortably against him, looking around at the soldiers and medics, their faces softer than moments ago, their movements more careful. It was as if the father had taught a lesson simply by being himself calm, patient, and present. The Marine felt a mix of admiration and humility. He had walked into the tent with a casual joke, expecting nothing more than a smile or a shrug. Instead, he had witnessed a masterclass in leadership and human connection. It wasn't about rank or protocol. It was about empathy, awareness, and the quiet power of doing what is right. As they reached the edge of the tent, the father paused briefly, glancing over his shoulder at the Marine. "Take care of the people around you," he said softly. "It's the small things that make the biggest difference." The Marine felt those words settle deep inside him. They weren't commands. They weren't orders. They were simple, human truths that carried more weight than any instruction he had ever received. The boy yawned softly, curling closer to his father. "Can we go now?" he whispered. "Yes," the father replied gently, lifting him slightly higher for comfort. "Let's head out." Outside, the light was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the muted tones of the tent. The father adjusted his hold, supporting his son with ease, careful not to jostle him. The Marine watched them move away, the man's calm strength evident in every step. It was a quiet dignity that left an impression far deeper than any rank insignia ever could. The soldiers in the tent resumed their duties, but the energy remained shifted. Conversations continued, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the lesson they had all just witnessed. The Marine felt it too, a subtle but lasting impact on the way he saw authority, respect, and leadership. He realized something important. Authority alone was meaningless without character. Respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned through actions, through care, and through integrity. The man had done all of this without a word of arrogance, without a single act of showmanship. And that was what made him truly remarkable. The Marine turned back toward the tents, feeling a sense of gratitude for the unexpected lesson. He had thought the encounter would be fleeting, a small moment in a long day. Instead, it had become a memory that would shape his understanding of leadership forever. The father and son disappeared from view, walking toward a small vehicle waiting at the edge of the camp. The boy rested against his father, trusting, calm, and reassured. The Marine watched until they were gone, taking in the lesson one last time. Leadership was quiet. Respect was earned. True strength came from care, patience, and consistency. The Marine exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. He would carry this with him, in his actions, in his decisions, and in the way he treated those around him. The GP tent had returned to its normal rhythm, but he knew that nothing about his understanding of authority or leadership would ever be the same. That day, a simple act of care had frozen a tent, shifted energy, and reminded everyone present of the human side of strength. It was a lesson in humility, responsibility, and the quiet power of doing right by others. And for the Marine who had walked in joking, it was a lesson that would never be forgotten. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the camp, the Marine stayed behind in the tent for a moment, reflecting on what he had seen. The lesson was clear. True leaders lead by example, not by rank. Respect is earned, not demanded. And sometimes, the most ordinary people are capable of extraordinary influence simply by being present. Attentive and compassionate, the father and son were gone, but their impact remained, woven into the fabric of the tent, the soldiers' minds, and the Marines' understanding. It was a reminder that strength and leadership were not always loud, and that sometimes the most powerful presence is the one that listens, cares, and leads quietly. And in that quiet, the Marine realized that he had been given something rare, a chance to witness real human leadership in its simplest and purest form, and to carry that lesson forward in everything he did from that day on. The man walked carefully through the camp, holding his son securely in his arms. The boy yawned again, resting his head against his father's chest, his small hands gripping the collar of his shirt. Every step the man took was measured, deliberate, and calm. There was no rush, no sense of hurry. For him, the world had narrowed to this one moment, keeping his child safe, reassured, and comfortable. Everything else, the rank, the responsibilities, the demands of the military world could wait. As they moved toward the small vehicle waiting for them. The Marine who had been watching from the GP tent followed at a distance, careful not to intrude, yet unable to tear his eyes away. He had spent the last several hours processing what he had seen and heard. This man, this quiet, unassuming father, had shown more strength, care, and leadership in a single afternoon than many people did in a lifetime. And he had done it without force, without pride, without seeking recognition. The father set the boy down gently on the seat of the vehicle. He checked the bandage one last time, making sure it was secure and comfortable. The boy looked up at him, eyes bright but tired, and smiled faintly. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. The man smiled back, brushing the boy's hair from his forehead. "You did great," he said. "I'm proud of you." The Marine watched the interaction quietly, struck by the natural, effortless love between father and son. There was no pretense here, no performance, just the simple truth of care, attention, and responsibility. As the boy settled in, the father turned his attention back to the camp. He gave a small wave to a few medics still standing nearby, nodding his thanks for their work. His eyes briefly met the Marine's, and he offered a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It was a smile of acknowledgement, not of superiority, an unspoken thank you for understanding. The Marine felt a rush of humility and gratitude. The man climbed into the driver's seat of the vehicle, the boy beside him. He started the engine slowly, careful and deliberate. The vehicle rumbled to life, a quiet sound that seemed to punctuate the calm energy the man carried. The Marine turned away slowly, letting the vehicle roll away, taking the father and his son with it. Back in the tent, the soldiers and medics had returned to their tasks. But there was a noticeable shift in demeanor. People spoke a little softer, moved a little slower, and seemed more attentive to one another. The Marine watched them for a moment, realizing that the father's presence had left a lasting impact. Leadership and respect had been shown in the simplest, most human way, and the lesson would stay with everyone present long after the day ended. The Marine's thoughts kept returning to the father's words from earlier. Take care of the people who matter most first. Everything else falls into place around them. He thought about how simple those words were, yet how powerful. They weren't just about military duty. They weren't just about rank or responsibility. They were about life, about priorities, about what it truly means to lead and to care. He leaned against a support pole in the tent, arms crossed, reflecting on the events. He had walked into the tent expecting a casual moment of humor, and instead, he had witnessed a living example of humility, patience, and human strength. It was a lesson he would carry with him forever, a reminder that authority was not always loud, and that true respect was earned quietly through consistent action and genuine care. The father and son were now moving down the dusty path that led out of the camp, and the Marine allowed himself a deep exhale. He had been nervous and unsure when he first asked the joking question about the father's rank. He had expected a casual answer, maybe a shrug, maybe a laugh. Instead, he had been humbled, inspired, and reminded of the importance of human connection. Above all else, as the vehicle disappeared over the small hill at the edge of the camp, the Marine thought about the lessons the day had taught him. Leadership was not about shouting orders or demanding respect. Respect was not something to be assumed or enforced. True strength and influence came from caring first, acting with integrity, and leading quietly by example. The soldiers in the tent moved again, resuming their duties. Yet the air felt different, lighter in some ways, but heavier in understanding. Everyone had absorbed the lesson in their own way, whether consciously or subconsciously. The Marine saw small gestures of thoughtfulness, nods of acknowledgement between colleagues, and an unspoken agreement to carry forward the example they had witnessed. The man's impact extended even beyond those who had seen him directly. Stories like this, small but powerful, spread through the ranks quickly. A quiet leader, a caring parent, a man who held his child with tenderness while commanding attention with humility. These were the stories that reminded people why they served, why they tried to do right, and why leadership mattered more than rank or position. Back in the tent, the Marine finally straightened, his shoulders feeling a little lighter. He took a deep breath, absorbing the lessons, committing them to memory. He understood now that the greatest leaders often led without making a sound, and that true respect was earned in the ordinary moments, the moments that others might overlook. Outside, the father parked the vehicle and lifted his son carefully out of the seat. He walked with the boy toward their quarters, making sure each step was safe and comfortable. The boy chatted softly, asking questions about small things they passed along the way. The father answered patiently, teaching, reassuring, and guiding without a single word of arrogance. The Marine watched them disappear into the distance, feeling a sense of quiet awe. He had learned something that could not be taught in classrooms, briefings, or manuals. He had learned about the weight of quiet authority, the power of patience, and the strength that comes from caring deeply. When the Marine finally returned to his duties, he did so with a new perspective. He interacted with soldiers differently, listened more carefully, and treated the younger medics with a patience he had not known he possessed. He remembered the father's calm presence, the way he carried his son, the quiet authority in every gesture, and he sought to apply the lesson in his own way. Throughout the rest of the day, he found himself recounting the moment over and over in his mind. How easy it had been to joke, how simple it had seemed, and how profoundly he had been taught humility and respect. The man had frozen a tent, not with loud words or orders, but with the simple power of presence, care, and integrity. Even as night fell and the camp quieted, the Marine's thoughts remained with the lesson. The father and son had shown him that true leadership was not about being noticed, but about making a difference quietly and consistently. Respect and influence were earned, not demanded, and the greatest acts of care could come in the smallest, most human gestures. Weeks later, the Marine would share the story with new recruits and fellow soldiers. He would recount how a single father, standing quietly in a GP tent, had taught an entire group of soldiers the real meaning of leadership, respect, and human strength. The story would inspire, remind, and teach, not because it was about a high rank or a medal, but because it was about humanity, character, and the quiet power of doing right by others. The father's lesson had rippled far beyond the tent, far beyond the camp, and into the hearts of those who had witnessed it. For the Marine, it would remain a guide for his own actions, a benchmark for how to treat others, how to lead, and how to live with care, integrity, and humility. And as the father tucked his son into bed that night, ensuring he was safe, comfortable, and reassured, he knew he had done what mattered most. Outside, the camp was quiet, the stars above steady and constant, and the lessons of the day carried softly through the ranks, unseen but deeply felt. The Marine, reflecting in his own quarters, understood something profound. Leadership was not about display. Strength was not about force. True influence came from quiet moments, simple acts of care, and consistent integrity. And sometimes, a single human moment holding a child, offering reassurance, showing patience, could teach more than 1,000 orders ever could. The day ended, but the impact of the father's presence would last. In the minds of the soldiers, in the attitudes of the medics, and in the heart of the Marine who had made a small, thoughtless joke. A powerful truth had taken root, that true leadership, respect, and strength were measured not in insignia or authority, but in care, humility, and the courage to lead quietly, thoughtfully, and with the heart. The father's lesson, simple yet profound, would echo in every action, every choice, and every interaction from that day forward. And for the Marine, for the camp, and for the soldiers who had quietly observed, it became clear that the most extraordinary leaders are often the ones who seem ordinary at first glance, who teach the hardest lessons without saying much at all, and who show the world the power of humanity in the smallest, most enduring ways.